Abia State Governor Alex Otti, visits the family of late General Aguiyi Ironsi to show his last respect. Imagine being killed by the very country you swore to protect, not by an enemy soldier, not by a foreign army, but by your own countrymen, and then having history twist your story for 60 years, painting you as a villain when you were actually a victim. That is the story we are about to unpack today. And by the time we finish, you will understand why what happened in Abia State recently is sending a powerful message across Nigeria and across the world. Before we go further, let me paint a picture for you. Picture an old woman sitting under a mango tree somewhere in a quiet village in the southeast. She has lived through many seasons, buried many relatives, and heard many stories passed down from her own parents about a war that changed everything. If you sat beside her and mentioned the name Aguiyi Ironsi, her eyes will probably soften, and she will tell you in her own way that this was a good man who was wronged. She may not have gone to school. She may not be able to read the newspaper, but she knows pain. She knows injustice. And she knows what it means to lose someone you love to forces beyond your control. This update is for her. This update is for every elderly man and woman in the village who deserves to understand in the simplest way possible what really happened to one of Nigeria's most misunderstood military leaders, and why a state governor recently stood before his memorial and gave him the honor that history denied him for 6 decades. Let us start from the beginning. Major General Johnson Thomas Umonekwe Aguiyi Ironsi was Nigeria's first military head of state. For many Nigerians, especially those who did not grow up hearing the full story, his name is often mentioned in the same breath as the bloody coup of January 1966. People assume he was one of the masterminds. People assume he plotted and schemed his way into power. But political commentators and historians who have taken the time to dig deeper into the records tell a very different story. And it is this story that deserves to be told plainly, without big grammar, without confusion, in a way that even someone who never sat in a classroom can understand. In January 1966, when that coup took place in Nigeria, Aguiyi Ironsi was not even in the country. He was far away in the Democratic Republic of Congo, serving as part of a peacekeeping mission during the Congo crisis. Think about that for a moment. Why young officers back home were plotting and executing one of the most consequential events in Nigerians' history. This man was on official duty, representing his country abroad, doing exactly what a soldier is trained to do. He did not sit in any secret meeting. He did not sign off on any plan. He did not pull any trigger. He He was simply doing his job, thousands of kilometers away from the chaos that was about to define his legacy forever. When news reached him about what had happened back home, he returned to Nigeria at that time as the most senior military officer in the country. Tradition and military protocol placed leadership in his hands. This was not some clever manipulation on his part. This was simply how the system worked. When there is a vacuum, someone with rank and seniority is expected to step in and restore order, especially in a moment as dangerous and uncertain as that one. Political analysts today argue that Aguiyi Ironsi's takeover was rooted in duty, not ambition. He was not scheming to become head of state. He was, according to those who have studied this period closely, a man trying to prevent his country from collapsing into total chaos. But here is where the tragedy of his story truly begins. Despite doing what military tradition demanded of him, despite having no hand in planning that coup, history somehow painted him as one of the conspirators. Analysts and observers who have revisited this chapter of Nigerian history argued strongly that this portrayal was unfair, and many go further to suggest that ethnicity played a significant role in how his legacy was shaped. Aguiyi Ironsi was an Igbo man, and in the tense, suspicious atmosphere that followed the coup, and in the tense, suspicious atmosphere that followed the coup, that single fact became a heavy burden on his name. Political commentators looking back on this period often ask a simple but powerful question. If Aguiyi Ironsi had been from a different ethnic background, would history have treated him the same way? Would he have been blamed so quickly, so harshly, and so permanently? Let us bring this closer to home with a story. Imagine a man named Okori, a respected elder in his community, known for his fairness and his sense of duty. One day, chaos broke out in his town while he is away attending to responsibilities elsewhere. When he finally returns, because he is the most senior and respected person available, the community leans on him to restore order. He steps in not because he wants power, but because someone has to hold things together. Yet, years later, people who were not even present during the chaos begin to whisper that Okorie was behind everything from the start. His good intentions are twisted into accusations. His sense of duty is rebranded as ambition, and eventually tragedy finds him. Not because of what he actually did, but because of what people assumed about him. This, in many ways, mirrors what happened to Aguiyi Ironsi. He stepped into leadership out of duty during a national emergency, yet paid for it with his life. Targeted, according to many political observers, because of the ethnic lens through which his actions were viewed. And that brings us to the heartbreaking part of this story. Aguiyi Ironsi was eventually killed not by a foreign enemy, not on some battlefield far away home, but by fellow Nigerians. Think about the irony of that. This was a man who had survived the dangers of military service abroad, who had represented his country in one of the most volatile regions in the world during the Congo crisis, only to return home and lose his life at the hands of the very people he has sworn to serve. He was born in 1924, which means he was only in his early 40s when his life was cut short in 1966. He might be around 41 or 42 years old, still a young man by many standards, with so much of his life still ahead of him. He left behind a wife and children. His wife, remarkably, is still alive today, carrying with her decades of memories, decades of grief, and perhaps decades of waiting for the day her husband's name would finally be spoken with the honor and dignity it deserves. This is exactly why what happened recently in Ada State matters so much. Governor Otti, in a move that has caught the attention of political commentators and historians alike, personally visited the family of the late General Aguiyi Ironsi to pay his respects. This was not a quiet, forgotten gesture. It was part of a larger memorial ceremony organized to mark the 60th anniversary of his passing. The event took place at the Aguiyi Ironsi Conference Center, a location that itself carries symbolic weight given the name it bears. Governor Otti attended the ceremony, laid a wreath in honor of the fallen general, and stood witness as a military parade was held to commemorate his life and legacy. For a moment, picture the scene: uniformed officers marching in formation, drums perhaps echoing softly in the background, a solemn crowd gathered under the weight of history, and a state governor standing before the family of a man who died believing he was doing right by his country. This was not just a ceremony, this was a public reaction that Aguiyi Ironsi's story deserves to be told correctly, that his memory deserves respect, and that history, even 60 years later, can still be corrected when people choose to speak the truth. During the ceremony, an inscription was read that captured the essence of who Aguiyi Ironsi truly was. He was described as a fearless soldier, an exemplary commander, a devoted family man, and a patriotic servant of his country. Words like courage, discipline, honor, unity, sacrifice, and service were used to describe his character. Those who organized this event wanted the world to remember him not as a footnote in a controversial coup, but as a man who embodied the very best of what a soldier and a leader should be. The audience was asked to salute him, and prayers were offered, not only for his soul, but for the souls of all who died during that painful chapter of Nigerian history, including the estimated 3 million Igbo victims of the Nigerian Civil War that followed in the years after his death. Now, some people watching this might wonder Why any of this matter today in 2026, 60 years later after the event took place? Why should anyone care about a man who died so long ago? But here is the thing political analysts keep emphasizing, and it is something worth reflecting on deeply. History has a way of repeating itself when people forget its lesson. When a community, a tribe, or a nation loses touch with its own past, it becomes vulnerable to being consumed by the very forces that once caused it harm. Understanding what happened to Aguiyi Ironsi is not just about honoring one man, it is about understanding a pattern of how narratives can be shaped unfairly, how entire groups of people can be blamed collectively for the actions of a few, and how silence over decades can allow injustice to calcify into accepted facts. This is why voices calling for what they describe as Igbo emancipation continue to link Aguiyi Ironsi's story to broader conversations happening today, including the ongoing discourse around Biafra and the continued detention proceedings involving Nnamdi Kanu. Political commentators who follow this issue closely argues that these threads are connected, that the story of one general who was wrongly blamed for a coup he did not plan is in many ways a reflection of a much larger story about how an entire people have felt misunderstood, mischaracterized, and unfairly treated across decades of Nigerian history. Let us bring in another character to help drive this home. Think of a young woman named Adaeze, born long after this event took place, growing up in the diaspora, far removed from the soil where all of this history unfolded. She hears fragments of these stories from her grandparents, disconnected pieces that never quite formed a complete picture. It is not It is only when she encounters moments like this, a governor publicly honoring a wronged general, a memorial ceremony broadcast for the world to see, that the pieces begin to come together for her. She begins to understand why certain conversations about identity, history, and justice still matter so deeply to her people today. She begins to understand why her grandparents speak with so much emotion whenever certain topics comes up. Adaeze represents countless young people across the diaspora who are only now piecing together the true weight of their history. An event like this memorial ceremony play a crucial role in that process of thinking. Political observers who have commented on Governor Otti's gesture describe it as more than symbolic. They see it as a form of historical correction, a public acknowledgement that the narrative surrounding Aguiyi Ironsi needs to be revisited and told with honesty. In a country where so much of the past remains contested, where different regions and different ethnic groups often tell conflicting versions of the same event, gestures like this matter because they open the door for honest dialogue. They remind the nation that healing cannot happen without truth, and truth cannot emerge if painful chapters of history are simply buried and ignored. It is worth pausing here to reflect on something deeply human about this story. Aguiyi Ironsi was not just a military figure or a historical footnote. He was a husband, he was a father, he was someone's son. When we strip away the politics and the historical analysis, what remains is the story of a family that lost a father far too soon, a wife who has spent 60 years carrying the weight of his memory, and children who grew up without him. When Governor Alex Otti visited that family, he was not simply performing a political duty, he was acknowledging a human loss that has never truly been given the space to be properly mourned and honored on a national scale. As this ceremony unfolded, there were also prayers offered for unity, for compassion, and for a spirit of brotherhood among Nigerians. Despite the painful history being discussed, the tone of the event, according to those who attended and commented on it, carried a message of hope rather than bitterness. It called on people to extend kindness to one another, to remember that regardless of ethnicity or background, everyone is connected as brothers and sisters. This is an important detail because it shows that revisiting painful history does not have to be an act of division. It can instead be an act of healing, a way of acknowledging wrongs so that genuine reconciliation becomes possible. So, what should you take away from all of this? First, understand that history is often more complicated than the simplified versions we are taught. So, what should you take away from all of this? First, understand that history is often more complicated than the simplified version we are taught or circulate casually in conversation. Aguiyi Ironsi's story reminds us that entire narratives can be shaped by circumstances beyond a person's control, and that fairness in how we remember historical figures matters just as much as fairness in how we treat people who are alive today matters. Second, understand that gestures like the one Governor Alex Otti made are significant. They send a message that history can be revisited, that wrongs, even those committed decades ago, can be acknowledged, and that leadership today has a responsibility to honor truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Third, and perhaps most importantly, understand that this conversation is far from over. The cause for Igbo emancipation, the continued attention on Nnamdi Kanu's situation, and the broader push for historical honesty are part of a larger ongoing movement, one that many believe is only just beginning. As we close today's discussion, I want you to sit with this thought. 60 years is a long time to wait for the truth to be told properly. 60 years is a long time for a family to wait for the public acknowledgement of what they lost. Yet, even after all that time, it is never too late to correct the record, never too late to honor the memory of those who served with duty and integrity, and never too late to have honest conversations about the parts of our history that continue to shape who we are today. If this breakdown helped you understand this story a little better, do not scroll past without showing some love. Hit that like button right away. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this conversation. If you know someone, a parent, a grandparent, a friend back home who would benefit from understanding this story in simple terms, please share this video with them. Do not keep this to yourself alone. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Tell me what you think about Governor Alex Otti's gesture. Tell me what you think about how history has treated Aguiyi Ironsi, and tell me your own family's memories, if you have any, connected to this period. Your voice matters in this conversation, and I read every comment. If you are new here, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode, and make sure you turn on that bell notification icon so you are the first to know whenever a new video drop. There's so much more history, so much more truth, and so much more that needs to be discussed, and I do not want you to miss a single conversation. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Come back soon for more, because we are just getting started. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.